All right, welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're going to be tackling a topic that I think can have surprisingly far-reaching effects. The power of small habits.
Small habits.
You know, you shared some really interesting stuff with me, including this episode of SmartPodcast.
Yeah.
With Kate, Patrick, and Harry. And they really dove into how these tiny daily actions that we take, you know, they might seem insignificant on their own, but they can actually build up and create some pretty substantial changes over time. So that's what we're going to be getting into today. We're going to really dig into their conversation, pull out those key insights, and hopefully leave you with some stuff that you can use to work toward your own goals.
Sounds good.
So I guess first, did anything in particular about that episode kind of jump out at you or really resonate with you?
Yeah, I mean, it's just remarkable, you know. Mm-hmm. We so often underestimate the power of just those small, consistent efforts that we put in.
Right.
And I think that Smart Podcast episode really gets at that, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of a fundamental principle that even those tiny actions, those little things, when we repeat them over and over, they can lead to like exponential growth in all different areas of our lives.
Absolutely. I mean, they kept coming back to this idea of making small, consistent improvements, you know.
Yeah.
They even specifically mention James Clear and his concept from Atomic Habits about getting just 1% better each day.
Oh, I love that book.
It's a good one.
Yeah.
And what I thought was cool was that they didn't just focus on like work productivity, right? They talked about how these small things can have this like ripple effect. You know, they affect our relationships, our mental well-being.
Oh, absolutely. It's a holistic.
Yeah. And it makes you wonder where consistently making just one tiny positive change could take you, you know, and even just a year. Like, what could that result in?
If we zoom out and think about it in kind of broader terms, it's really the principle of compounding. Right? But instead of just, you know, thinking about it with our finances, we're thinking about it with our lives. Like, look at Warren Buffett.
Yeah, great example.
I mean, small, regular investments over decades.
Yeah.
And it's grown into something massive, right?
Huge. Yeah.
I mean, it's that consistent daily improvement that even if it feels negligible in the moment, builds on itself and it creates this powerful trajectory over time. It's almost like it defies intuition how something so small can yield such huge results.
Yeah. It's like you don't notice it while it's happening, and then all of a sudden you look back and you're like, whoa, how did I get here?
Exactly.
Okay, so let's get into like the nuts and bolts here. There's this central idea from the Smart Podcast discussion that I think is key to understanding how these small habits actually work. And that's this thing they call the cue routine reward loop.
Yes.
And they present this as a fundamental framework for not only understanding the habits that we already have, but also like building new ones. So could you break that down for us a little bit? Like what exactly is this loop about?
Yeah, so this loop is a really practical way to understand how habits work. I think about it almost like the mechanics of a habit.
Okay.
So the cue is essentially the trigger. It's what signals to your brain, okay, it's time to initiate a behavior. The routine is the action itself, right? And that could be physical, mental, or emotional.
Okay.
And then the reward is the positive reinforcement that your brain gets after that routine. And it kind of strengthens the connection between that cue and routine, making it more likely that you're going to do it again in the future.
So I think they gave an example, like seeing your gym bag packed by the door. That would be the cue.
Cue.
Then you go to the gym for 20 minutes. That's the routine. And then afterwards, you feel that sense of accomplishment, or maybe you, I don't know, have a healthy smoothie or something. That's the reward.
Reward.
And then your brain is like, ooh, I like that.
Exactly. And what's interesting is it seems like our brains, they're constantly looking for these patterns, and then they just reinforce them.
Wow. So how does understanding this cycle actually help us, like, build new habits or maybe break old ones?
Well, I think the key is it gives us leverage, right? So if we become aware of the cues that are triggering these unwanted habits, we can try to, you know, either modify them or avoid them.
Okay.
But then on the flip side, for habits we want to build, we can design really clear and effective cues.
Oh, that makes sense.
You know, like if this, then that.
Right.
And understanding the reward we're seeking from a habit can also help us find maybe healthier or more productive routines that are going to give us that same feeling of satisfaction.
So it's not just about like willpower and forcing yourself to do it. It's about setting yourself up for success.
Exactly.
So the Smart Podcast episode wasn't just all theory, right? They actually had some really concrete strategies for how to start building these small habits. And one of the things that they emphasized, and it really resonated with me, was this idea of starting absolutely tiny.
Yeah, starting small.
Like so small that you almost feel silly. So they said, like, if you want to start exercising, don't shoot for an hour at the gym right away. Just commit to doing like 2 push-ups every morning.
Exactly.
It seems almost ridiculously easy, but I guess that's the point, right?
That's exactly the point.
Yeah.
By making that initial commitment super small, you just reduce the mental resistance you have to starting.
Yeah, because it doesn't seem so daunting.
Exactly. You're lowering that activation energy so much that it becomes almost effortless to take that first step.
Yeah.
And what that does is it makes it much more likely that you're going to be consistent. And that, as we've been talking about, is the real key to these small habits.
Consistency is key. I like that. What else? What were some other strategies?
Well, they also talked about, the importance of making the habit as easy as possible.
Okay.
They use this phrase, setting up your environment for success. So, for example, if you want to read more, leave a book on your nightstand.
Oh, yeah. So you see it.
Where you're going to see it first thing in the morning. It's all about removing any friction that might prevent you from taking that action.
So it's almost like you're tricking yourself into doing it.
Well, it's a little bit of that, right? You're just making it so easy that it's almost harder not to do it.
Oh, okay. I like that.
Yeah.
There was another strategy they talked about that I thought was really clever, and that was this idea of attaching a new habit to an existing one.
Oh, yeah. Habit stacking.
Yeah, that's what they called it. So, like, if you want to start like a gratitude practice, maybe you could try doing it immediately after you've had your morning coffee. So it's piggybacking on something that you already do automatically.
That's a very effective technique because you're linking a new behavior to an already established routine. So you're leveraging the existing neural pathways in your brain. It's like a shortcut.
Oh, interesting.
Reduces the cognitive effort that's required
Yeah.
to remember and initiate the new habit because it becomes part of that familiar sequence.
It's almost like too easy.
I know, right?
This is great stuff. One other thing that they really emphasized on the podcast was the value of tracking your progress.
Oh, tracking is huge.
Even if it seems really minuscule, right? Like,
Yeah.
even if it's just, 2 push-ups, why is that so important?
Well, I think that when you see that visual evidence of your consistency, even if it's just marking off that you did those 2 push-ups, it could be surprisingly motivating.
Okay.
It's like you're giving yourself that feedback and it reinforces this idea that your efforts are accumulating. It gives you a sense of accomplishment, and that in turn strengthens that habit loop.
It's like a visual reminder that you're doing something.
Exactly. And I think the other benefit of tracking is that, if you're tracking it and you see that a habit isn't sticking, you can make adjustments as needed.
It keeps you honest.
It does. It does.
I remember they had this little soundbite. It was like, make the habit so small that you can't say no.
Oh, yeah. I love that.
That really stuck with me. And Harry, the guest, I think he added something to that. He said, if that initial action takes less than 2 minutes, you're far more likely to do it consistently.
The 2-minute rule.
Yeah, the 2-minute rule.
It's a fantastic guideline. It's really about breaking down that desired habit into the smallest possible starting action.
Okay.
And what this does is it helps to overcome procrastination and build initial momentum.
Because you're like, oh, I can do that.
2 minutes, no problem. And then once you've started, even if it's just for a short time, you often find that it's easier to just keep going.
You're already in it. Might as well keep doing it.
Exactly.
Okay, so I really like how the SmartPodcast episode brought in some real-world examples to illustrate just how powerful these small habits can be.
Yeah.
I mean, they talked about how Warren Buffett, he started with small investments that through consistent effort and compounding grew into this like massive fortune.
Yeah, unbelievable.
They mentioned Serena Williams and her incredibly disciplined daily routines and how those were built on small, consistent efforts that contributed to her becoming a champion.
I mean, talk about dedication.
Yeah, they even talked about Elon Musk and how his childhood habit of just like voraciously reading every day, like just reading everything he could get his hands on, that was presented as like a small, consistent action that shaped his vast knowledge and his innovative thinking. So, I mean, we're talking about like investing, athletics, like big time business.
I mean, it just shows you that these principles apply across all these diverse fields.
Totally.
Like Buffett's disciplined investing, Serena's rigorous training regimen, and Elon Musk just constantly learning, they all seem like small daily choices, but they've compounded over time and produced these extraordinary results. I mean, it just highlights the point that those significant achievements, those big things, they're often the culmination of many small, consistent steps.
Yeah. I love that. It's so encouraging to see that, like, achieving great things isn't necessarily about making these huge, dramatic overnight changes, but it's more often the result of just these small, consistent steps taken day after day.
Yeah, consistency over intensity.
Totally. And I think, as Harry pointed out, what's really cool about this is that it's accessible to everyone. It doesn't require you to have some special talent or ability to start small.
Wow, it's democratizing.
Yeah, it's not about these massive overhauls or like having the superhuman willpower.
Right.
It's about making tiny, sustainable adjustments that anyone can incorporate into their life.
You got it.
Okay, so let's kind of pull together the key takeaways from this deep dive into SmartPodcast. I think what we've really seen is that the compounding effect of small habits, it can lead to some pretty significant changes, just like that idea of 1% daily improvement. We've unpacked the cue, routine, reward cycle, and we've looked at some practical strategies for starting incredibly small, for making those habits easy by adjusting our environment, and for tracking our progress to stay motivated.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think the core message is that consistent progress, no matter how small it might seem in the moment, is what drives lasting change. And we know that understanding the habit loop, that gives us a roadmap for how habits are formed.
Right.
And then all those practical strategies, those offer us tangible ways to start implementing this in our own lives.
Okay, so before we wrap up, I want to borrow a page from SmartPodcast here because they issued a challenge to their listeners, and I think it's a great one that we can kind of adapt for our listeners as well.
Okay, I'm game.
So this week, we want you to try to identify just one tiny habit, and I mean tiny, like almost laughably small, that you can start to incorporate into your routine.
Tiny.
So we're talking like maybe drinking a single glass of water first thing in the morning, or spending just 1 minute stretching, or even just jotting down one thing that you're grateful for at the end of the day, just one thing.
One thing.
The crucial thing here, and they emphasize this a lot, is to start ridiculously small and focus on being consistent with that one manageable action.
Exactly. It's not about seeing some immediate, huge, visible outcome. It's about establishing that consistency, building that mental muscle, and proving to yourself that you can stick with something new.
It's building that foundation.
Exactly. And then once that tiny habit becomes automatic, then you can start to build from there.
You can level up.
You got it.
So I think this ties into the last thing I wanted to touch on. You know, we talked about all those examples from SmartPodcast, like Warren Buffett with his investments, Serena Williams and her routines, Elon Musk and his reading habit, and they all achieved such incredible things. So finally, I want to ask you, when you consider those examples and you think about your own life, what areas do you think could be transformed by applying the same principle of small, consistent effort? Like what seemingly insignificant action, if you repeated it every single day, could maybe unlock some unexpected potential for you, or even lead to some remarkable outcomes in the long run? I think that's something we're thinking about this week.
I love that. You know, it encourages you to think about the long-term possibilities
that
small things can lead to. You know, what seeds are we planting today that through consistent effort might blossom into something truly meaningful for us down the line?
And, you know, sometimes the hardest part is just taking that first step.
That very first step.
But if it's a tiny one, maybe it won't feel so hard after all.
Exactly.
Well, on that note, I think it's time for us to wrap up. Thank you for joining us on the Deep Dive.
Thanks for having me.
And until next time, keep diving.
Keep diving.